December 21st, 1968. 4 days before Christmas, I want to start by telling you what kind of year 1968 had been, because I think you need to understand the context to understand what happens at the end of the story and how it lands the way it does. January, the Tet Offensive begins in Vietnam, shattering the official narrative that the war is going well. February.
It wasn't?
Up to that point, they were trying to tell everyone it was.
What? We're talking about Vietnam, not Iran.
Yeah, well, very comparable. February, public support for the war falls below 50% for the first time. March, the My Lai massacre occurs. Please check out our episode on that.
Yeah.
Though the public won't know about it for another year. April 4th, Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. American cities burn.
Don't forget our episode on that one, too.
Mm-hmm. June 5th, Robert F. Kennedy is assassinated in Los Angeles hours after winning the California Democratic primary.
We don't have that episode, sorry.
Yet. August, the Democratic National Convention in Chicago descends into a riot on live television. Police beat demonstrators outside while delegates argue inside. September, Richard Nixon and Hubert Humphrey, I have no idea why I said Robert, Hubert Humphrey, run the most divisive presidential campaign in modern memory. November, Nixon wins. December, 58,000 Americans have now died in Vietnam. The civil rights movement is fractured. The country feels like it's coming apart. And on December 21st, 1968, 3 men climb into a rocket at Cape Kennedy and go to the moon.
Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, Bill Anders. This is Apollo 8, and it might be the most audacious single decision in the history of human spaceflight.
Welcome to Time Tellers. I'm Renee.
And I'm Dan. Last episode we talked about the fire that almost ended the Apollo program. Today we're talking about the mission that saved it, and the photograph that changed how humanity sees itself.
It happened on Christmas Eve because 1968 was apparently determined to be dramatic even in its final days.
History was not subtle that year.
No, it wasn't.
To understand how extraordinary this mission was, you need to understand what it replaced. The original Apollo 8 was supposed to be a routine Earth orbit test flight checking out the newly redesigned spacecraft. The systems that had been rebuilt after the Apollo 1 fire, low-risk, conservative, the kind of methodical step-by-step progression that NASA's original plan called for. And then in August 1968, something happened that changed everything. A CIA intelligence report landed on NASA Administrator Jim Webb's desk. The report indicated that the Soviet Union was preparing to send cosmonauts on a circumlunar flight around the moon and back before the end of the year, possibly within months.
Wait, so the Soviets were about to beat us to the moon?
To the moon's vicinity, yes. Not landing. Nobody was close to a landing, but to orbit it, or at a minimum, to loop around it. And a Soviet cosmonaut going around the moon before an American would be another massive propaganda victory. After Sputnik, after Gagarin, after the first spacewalk, another first would be devastating for the American program, especially in a year that had already been as brutal as 1968. A flight director named George Low, one of the most important people in the Apollo program whose name almost nobody knows, had been quietly thinking about an alternative. What if Apollo 8 didn't test the equipment in Earth orbit? What if it went to the moon instead?
Without a full test first?
Without a lunar module, which wasn't ready, and on only the second crewed flight of the Saturn V, a rocket that had only been flown twice unmanned. Low brought the idea to the NASA Administrator Webb and to Chris Kraft, the Director of Flight Operations. Webb was initially resistant. The risks were enormous. If it failed, it wasn't just 3 astronauts. It was the program. It was the decade-end deadline. It was everything. But the Soviet threat was real, and the window was now. Webb ultimately approved it.
And the crew.
Frank Borman was selected as commander. Borman is a fascinating figure, possibly the least romantic person in the entire space program, which is saying something. Don't spit up your monster.
It was a funny line. I don't know.
He was mission-focused to a degree that bordered on the pathological. He was not interested in the poetry of space travel. He was interested in completing the objective and coming home. He was also, by every account, absolutely exceptional under pressure. When NASA told him about the mission change 2 months before launch, Borman called his wife Susan from the office to break the news. Her response has become one of the most quoted things any astronaut wife ever said. She told him, "I know you're going to die, but I also know there's nothing I can do about it." And then she said, "Okay."
That sentence is one of the most devastating things I've ever heard. I know you're going to die? She didn't argue. She didn't beg him not to go. She just accepted it because she knew her husband.
Susan Borman had been an astronaut wife for years by this point. She understood exactly what her husband did and what it meant. She also suffered from severe depression throughout the Apollo years, something that was hidden from NASA for fear it would affect Frank's career. She later said the years of watching him risk his life were the hardest thing she ever endured.
And nobody knew. She was carrying that alone.
Jim Lovell was the command module pilot. You'll know him better in our Apollo 13 episode. Spoiler alert. He's the one who went back, warm, funny, deeply competent, genuinely loved by everyone in the program. He later wrote about the journey with the kind of reflective generosity that makes his memoir one of the best books about the space program. Bill Anders was the junior member of the crew, 35 years old, nuclear engineer, fighter pilot, the crew's designated science and photography officer. He had spent months training to photograph the lunar surface to support future landing mission planning. He was in every sense prepared to document the moon. He ended up taking one of the most important photographs ever made, almost accidentally.
You keep saying almost, but don't worry, we're getting to that.
We're getting to that. December 21st, 1968, Apollo 8 launches from Kennedy Space Center at 7:51 in the morning. The Saturn V works perfectly. They're in translunar injection, heading for the moon within hours. 3 days of travel, 3 days of being further from Earth than any human being had ever been, watching the planet get smaller in the window. Borman got sick early on. Nausea, vomiting, possibly a 24-hour bug, possibly motion sickness, possibly the stress of what they were doing. He didn't tell Mission Control the full extent of it because he was worried they'd abort the mission.
He hid being sick because he thought they'd turn the spaceship around. That's a legit concern.
Well, but they really couldn't have if it's on the way.
Yeah,
because they would kind of need to rely on the gravity to...
True.
So once they're out of Earth's orbit, yeah, they're going to the moon.
Right.
He's a very stubborn man. The others dealt with the illness too to varying degrees. Lovell later said the trip out was uncomfortable but manageable. They had work to do. Navigational calculations, system checks, preparing for what came next. And what came next was the most dangerous single moment of the mission. On Christmas Eve, December 24th, they arrive at the moon and prepare to fire the engine, to slow down enough to enter lunar orbit. This is called lunar orbit insertion, and it happens on the far side of the moon, completely out of radio contact with Earth.
So Mission Control can't see what is at all happening.
For 16 minutes, there's a complete communications blackout. Mission Control can't see them, can't talk to them, can't help them. The crew fires the engine, goes behind the moon, and Mission Control sits in absolute silence and waits.
That must have been terrifying for them, not knowing what was going on.
Maybe. If the engine burns too long, the spacecraft crashes into the lunar surface. If it doesn't burn long enough, it skips off the moon's gravity and the crew are sent in an arcing trajectory into deep space with no way home.
Yikes.
The margin for error is measured in seconds of burn time.
And Mission Control is just sitting there, in silence, waiting.
For 16 minutes, which you are now about to listen to.
Thanks a lot, Trips. We'll see you on the other side.
Apollo 8, this is Houston. Over.
Roger, you have me read you loud and clear. How do you read us?
Apollo 8, this is Houston. They're reading you loud and clear now. Verify your evaporator water control panel switch to the auto position. Over.
Roger, it is an auto.
Roger.
Burn status report as follows. Burn time 4 minutes, 6.5 seconds. VGX minus 1.4. Attitudes nominal. No trim. VGY was 0. VGZ was plus 0.2. Delta VC was minus 20.2. Orbit 169.1 by 60.5.
Following Houston, roger, the burn on time. Burn time of 4:06.5. VGX is minus 1.4.
Human beings were in orbit around the moon for the first time in history.
And Mission Control?
Did exactly what you'd expect from a room full of engineers who'd been holding their breath for 16 minutes.
They took a breath and then lost it.
And then they lit cigars. Multiple cigars. This was 1968. You could smoke in Mission Control.
And a lot of them did continuously.
Flight director Glenn Lunny, who was on console during the orbital insertion, later said it was one of the purest moments of professional joy he'd ever experienced.
And they were in orbit around the moon.
10 orbits over the next 24 hours at an altitude of roughly 60 miles, close enough to see the surface in extraordinary detail. The craters, the mountains, the absolute desolate stillness of a world that has no atmosphere, no weather, no erosion. A world that looks exactly the same as it had for billions of years.
I wonder what it was like. Did they describe it as they saw it?
Borman called it a vast, lonely, forbidding expanse of nothing. He wasn't wrong. The moon is beautiful and also deeply, profoundly inhospitable. No air, no water. Temperature swings of hundreds of degrees between sunlight and shadow. The astronauts had been warned that the surface was going to be impressive, and they should stay focused on their tasks. Borman took this seriously. He did not want his crew getting distracted by the view. Which makes what happened next somewhat ironic.
Okay, the photograph. Let me tell this story because it's extraordinary and it deserves to be told carefully. The crew's assigned photographic task on their mission was to photograph the lunar surface, specifically to document potential landing sites for future missions. That was the job. Bill Anders had spent months preparing for it. He had a 70mm Hasselblad camera loaded with color film. He had a shot list. He had a plan. They're on their 4th orbit. It's Christmas Eve. They've been at the moon for hours. As the spacecraft rotates in its orientation slowly, and a maneuver called the barbecue roll that distributes heat evenly, Bill Anders looked out the window and he sees Earth. Rising above the lunar horizon, this blue and white marble, impossibly vivid against the absolute black of space, a planet, their planet, home, looking impossibly small and impossibly beautiful and impossibly fragile.
You sounded way too excited. The moon has no atmosphere, so there's no sky, just blackness. The Earth appears against that blackness as the most vivid, colorful, alive thing you could possibly imagine. It glows. It's the only thing in the entire universe at that moment that looks like it has anything alive on it.
Anders sees it and he says on the mission recorder,
Oh my God, look at that picture over there. There's the Earth coming up. Wow, that's pretty. And I'll take that pop schedule. You got a color film, Jim? Hand me a roll of color, quick. Oh, man, that's great. Where is it? Quick. Down here? Just grab me a color. A color exterior. Yeah. That one? Yeah, I'm looking for one. C368. Anything, quick. Here. Huh? Hey, I got it right here. Let me get up. This is a lot clearer. No, I got it very clear right here. You got it? Yeah. Take several. Let's several of here. Let's get the right setting here. Calm down, Bubble. Oh, I got it right. Oh, that's a beautiful shot. 250 at F11. Okay. Oh, very clear. I did. I took you up there.
Anders takes 3 more frames, one of which, frame AS8-14-2383, becomes the photograph known as Earthrise.
I don't know. I preferred it being called frame AS8-14-2383. Sounds more Star Wars. Earthrise has been called by many environmental historians the most influential environmental photograph ever taken. It's been credited as a significant catalyst for the environmental movement. The first Earth Day was April 22nd, 1970, less than 16 months after Apollo 8. The Clean Air Act of 1970, the Clean Water Act of 1972, the formation of the EPA in 1970, all of those occurred within a few years of Earthrise being published. And the photograph was explicitly cited by many of the movement's founders as a transformative image.
Why? Why does this photograph specifically do what it does?
Just look at it.
It's pretty.
Agreed. Oh, the photograph.
Hmm.
Fine, no more compliments for you. Because it shows something that had never been seen before. The Earth has a finite object, a thing with edges, a small, fragile, and possibly beautiful sphere floating in an infinite darkness that doesn't care about it at all. Before space photography, even before Apollo 8, people had maps and globes and the intellectual understanding that Earth was a planet in space. But
What? Sorry.
seeing... Can I continue?
Yes, I'm sorry.
But actually seeing it in a photograph from that distance, from that angle, changed something in how humans understood their situation.
The overview effect, that's what they call it, right? When astronauts see the Earth from space and have the shift in consciousness about what the planet is.
The overview effect, a term coined by writer Frank White in 1987, yes. Almost every astronaut who has gone to space describes some version of it. The sense of the Earth's smallness and fragility, the sense of the absurdity of the lines we've drawn on it, the sense of responsibility.
And Bill Anders actually said something about this that I find extraordinary. He said later, "We came all this way to explore the moon, and the most important thing is that we discovered the Earth. They went to look at the moon. They end up discovering themselves."
And Frank Borman, who had refused to let Anders take the photograph in the first place, has, in his later years, called Earthrise one of the most important things to ever come out of the space program. He came around.
It took him a while.
He's a stubborn man.
Okay, Christmas Eve, 1968. They are in their 9th orbit around the moon, and they are about to do a live television broadcast to Earth. This is the part of the story I find most extraordinary as someone who thinks about language and writing for a living, because of how it all came together.
Tell it.
So NASA had told Borman before the mission that on Christmas Eve, they expected to have the largest television audience in human history watching this broadcast. 1 billion people across 64 countries. And the instruction was, say something appropriate. That was the guidance. Say something appropriate to 1 billion people from the moon on Christmas Eve. Borman later said that he found this instruction utterly paralyzing. I can't imagine why. He started writing drafts. They kept coming out wrong. Too political, too apologetic about Vietnam, too small for the moment. A White House public affairs official named Julian Scheer was brought in to help. He had the same problem. Everything felt insufficient.
He went home and talked to his wife, and she suggested, and nobody knows exactly how this conversation went, which is its own kind of beautiful thing. She suggested they read from Genesis, the opening of the book of Genesis, the beginning of the world.
A woman whose name almost nobody knows suggested the words that 3 men spoke from the moon on Christmas Eve to 1 billion people. I like that.
To speak to 1 billion people on Christmas Eve?
No, that it was a woman.
Her name was C. Scheer, and yes, that's where the Genesis idea came from.
The idea being, Genesis isn't specifically Christian or Jewish or American. It's the story that almost every civilization on Earth has some version of. How it all began. It belongs to everyone. On Christmas Eve from the moon, reading the first words of the oldest story. That's the right move, some would say.
Borman agreed. They divided the reading among the 3 of them. Anders starting, Lovell continuing, Borman closing.
We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness.
And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters,
and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day.
And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. Then God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth.
1 in 4 people alive on Earth heard that broadcast live in 64 countries on Christmas Eve from the moon.
The year that gave America the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy. That gave America the Democratic Convention riots in the quagmire of Vietnam and 58,000 dead. That year, that specific, brutal, exhausting year, ended with 3 men reading the beginning of the world from lunar orbit on Christmas Eve. I don't know what to do with that. I really don't.
Neither does anyone who really sits with it. It's too large to fully understand. It's too coincidental to feel accidental. 1968 needed something, and somehow it got this.
The Borman line, all of you on the good earth, who writes that in the moment after reading Genesis?
Frank Borman, who is famously not a romantic, who refused to let his crew take tourist snapshots, who is perhaps the most practical human being ever to go to space. That line came from him.
Even the least romantic people have their moment.
Another 16-minute blackout as the spacecraft performs a trans-Earth injection burn on the far side of the moon. Another engine burn where too much or too little means the crew doesn't come home. And then Jim Lovell's voice comes through, Roger, please be informed there is a Santa Claus.
There is a Santa Claus. The burn worked.
Houston, Apollo 8, over.
Hello, Apollo 8. Loud clear.
Roger. Please be informed there is a Santa Claus.
They were coming home. They splashed down on December 27th, 1968 in the Pacific Ocean. All 3 men healthy, the first human beings to have traveled to the moon.
And strategically, what did this do to the space race?
It essentially ended the competition for the moon. The Soviet circumlunar program, the one that had triggered the decision to send Apollo 8, quietly fell apart in the months that followed. Their giant moon rocket, the N-1, was failing in testing. Their chief designer, Sergei Korolev, had died in 1966. Their program was in trouble they couldn't fix on the timeline they needed. Excuse me? Apollo 8 didn't just beat the Soviets to the moon, it broke their will to try for the moon at all. They shifted focus to space stations where they were genuinely competitive. The moon became America's.
And culturally, the Earthrise photograph, the broadcast, what was the public's response?
Enormous. Telegrams flooded into NASA from around the world. Many of them simply said thank you. Poet Archibald MacLeish published an essay in the New York Times on Christmas Day called Riders on Earth Together, Brothers in Eternal Cold, inspired by what he'd watched the night before. He described the astronauts as having given humanity the world as it truly is, small and blue and beautiful in the eternal silence where it floats. His phrase, Riders on Earth Together, became one of the most quoted descriptions of the human condition in the post-Apollo era.
And the environmental connection? Say more about that, because I think it's significant.
Gaylord Nelson, a senator from Wisconsin who conceived Earth Day, later said explicitly that Earthrise was a defining image for the movement, that it made the case for environmental protection in a way that data and reports couldn't, because it made the Earth's finitude visible. The photograph showed up in the materials for the first Earth Day planning meetings. It appeared on buttons, flyers, posters. Stuart Brand, who had been campaigning for NASA to release a whole Earth photograph for years before Apollo 8, said the Earthrise image was exactly what he'd been asking for and more powerful than he'd imagined.
So in a weird way, Apollo 8 helped create the modern environmental movement.
In a very real way, the program that was burning enormous amounts of fuel and consuming billions of dollars and was the product of the Cold War militarism, it inadvertently made one of the most powerful arguments for taking care of the planet ever made.
History is so strange. You go to the moon to beat the Soviets, and you end up launching environmentalism.
You go to photograph the moon, and you accidentally take the most important environmental photograph in history.
Bill Anders keeping the camera going when Borman told him to stop. Hero move.
Everything comes back to Bill Anders not listening to Boardman.
Next episode, The Landing. Apollo 11. 17 seconds of fuel. A 26-year-old software engineer and the most watched moment in human history.
That was filmed on a soundstage.
What was it?
Keep asking questions.
And keep looking up. Bye!
Can I have the outro music, please?
That
doesn't sound like it's building towards anything. Did you not read your directives? Read your directives.
Bye.